This is Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, and sorry if I sound a little gravelly or stuffy. I have strep throat right now. Happily, the mind is working, and we're going to look at the latest ThinkPad in the T Slim series. This is the ThinkPad T460s. It's obviously the successor to the T440s and the T450s that we review once a year or so. They refresh this. Some bigger changes inside now, but one thing I can say is it's got that usual rugged Lenovo build, but it's gotten thinner and it's got a little bit of a taper to it. It's only 3 pounds, so that's, you know, for chunky ThinkPad people, you got to say this is not a bad looking machine. There are ample ports in here. This is an Intel Skylake 6th generation machine, latest version. Ours has 8 gigs of RAM and a 256 gig SSD. There's a variety of configurations. We'll discuss that too. We're going to look at it now. Usually ThinkPads evolve rather slowly. There's some relatively big changes here from the T440s and the T450s. First off, look at that. It's pretty thin and it's also very light. This is almost in carbon territory, the Lenovo ThinkPad X Carbon model, but it's a T series, it sure is, but at 3 pounds and well under an inch thick, it's svelte enough. Backlit keyboard, the usual excellent Lenovo keyboard with good key travel are here. Some things have changed on, maybe not for the better, depending on your opinion. While it did lose considerable weight, over half a pound from last year's model, there's no more bridge battery system, so you can't attach a secondary battery to the bottom to extend runtimes. Most people will be okay with the switch from a VGA to an HDMI port. You can see we have ample ports here. That's one of the nice things about a T-series machine, unlike the Carbons that are sometimes a little bit port deprived to make them so thin and so light. It's durable, it's mil-spec, it's all Skylake inside. And we still have some of those nice upgradable parts like a RAM slot and SSD slot, and there's even another slot available in case you want to have an LTE 4G modem inside. Machine is available starting under $1,000, so for a ThinkPad that's not so bad, and you still get that ruggedness and the fairly good service and warranties that Lenovo offer. And also lays 100% flat. It doesn't yoga, but it does flatten. So what weighs 3 pounds is 0.67 inches thin. That's around 17 millimeters, but is still mil-spec solid. That would be the ThinkPad T series, and particularly the T460s. The S is always the skinny and lighter weight model, and this is the lightest model. Yeah, it's also gotten a little bit skinnier too, and it certainly's got a nice taper to it, but it still has the magnesium alloy inner casing. It's got carbon fiber and reinforced glass, fiberglass on the outside. It's strong stuff. It's the usual, you know, drop it and your floor may be in danger, but it probably will do just fine. It passed the mil-spec STD A10G military certification 8 test, shock, humidity, extreme temps, sand, vibration, and high altitude. So you can basically take it to the beach when it's 105 degrees and the sand is blowing, and it should be okay. You can't throw it in the ocean though. As you'd expect from a ThinkPad series machine, it's pretty easy to open up and service it. There's only 5 screws that hold the bottom on. This one here is for the keyboard release, actually. So they're an odd kind of, it's easier to just use a slot head rather than a Phillips head screw. There's no nasty clips that are going to fight with you and break off. You just unscrew it, take it off, and you have access to the internals. ThinkPad goodness there. Inside, it's reasonably upgradable for an Ultrabook. There is 1 RAM slot. There are actually 2 M2 slots. One is used for the SSD, your choice of a SATA interface, which will be cheaper, or a PCIe NVMe drive, which will be very expensive. Lenovo's upcharge on that's pretty high, and honestly, I think most of us really won't notice the difference in experiential use, everyday use. The 2.5-inch dry bay, gone, sorry. It does have 2 batteries, which is just kind of an odd thing here. There's a battery here, and there's a battery here. They've split them in half. Only they could really tell us why that is. Each of them is 3 cells, 23.5 watt-hour and 26 watt-hour. So you're looking at a little over, around 50 watt-hour battery total. You can replace them if you open the bottom and service them as you would an SSD or a hard drive or the RAM. Obviously, there's no popping out of a battery anymore. So that's what's different from the T450s, which still had Lenovo's bridge battery system, where there was an internal battery built into the front, and then there was an actual removable, it has a latch, you can pop it out, secondary battery, and you could choose from the lower capacity to make it thinner and lighter, or the higher capacity if you needed more stamina. Sadly, that's gone, but that's because Lenovo really wanted the 460S model. There's still a regular 460. They wanted the S model to be as thin and light as possible. And it is about 3/4 of a pound lighter than the regular T460, and it is a 1/2 pound lighter than the outgoing generation. Now, instead of using the OneLink Plus docks, this one actually uses the old style connector on the bottom. So the OneLink Pro or the OneLink Ultra docks here if you do want to dock it at your desk. That said, there's a very ample amount of ports built into this already, so the port replicator is in part for convenience. Oh, also WiGig is available too. On this side, obvious ventilation over here. This is where Lenovo's charger plugs in. It's their standard square style charger. USB 3.0, your combo headphone jack, SD card slot on this side. Sierra Wireless optional unlocked 4G LTE modem is available. If you get that, this is where your SIM card slot is. We have gigabit Ethernet right here, another USB 3.0 port, full-size HDMI that replaces the VGA port that they used to have. Modern times, folks, it's coming. Mini DisplayPort right here, and another USB 3.0 port. There is no USB-C on this. Sorry about that, folks. Optional SmartCard reader is available too for those of you who actually still use that. Now, our friend can lay flat on his back like so. It does not yoga. It does not bend over backwards. It doesn't do any of those tricks. This is a conventional laptop that happens to get pretty darn flat. The keyboard is, well, typical, very good ThinkPad keyboard, and a lot like the feel of the X1 Yoga, which is a fine thing. 1.9 millimeters of key travel, so that's lots of key travel. The damping is very nice. It's not an annoying, overly clacky kind of keyboard at all. Smile-shaped keys. It's good stuff. Backlit, as usual with Lenovo, you hit the FN and the spacebar to turn it on. In a brightly lit room like this, it might be hard to see, but again, that works fine, and that does the job. Synaptics trackpad with your nav point pointer over here. Dedicated buttons for the pointer, but you're using the buttonless trackpad for the regular trackpad thing. And as ever, it's Synaptics with plenty of settings for pinch and zooming and multi-finger gestures. It works very well. Nice job. Typically, Lenovo does do a good job with it. Fingerprint scanner over here, that is optional, but I think it's available on probably in most pre-built configurations that Lenovo is selling. And it's the kind you lay your finger on, no more little annoying slit. So that works very well. Works with the TPM module that's built into it. Well, for the display, there's good news and bad news. It's overall good news. Lenovo's business ThinkPad laptops typically haven't had the greatest displays in terms of color gamut. Brightness, it depends on the model as to what they're rating it at, and resolutions have sometimes fallen behind. In fact, the regular T460 still maxes out at a 1920 by 1080 Full HD display. This one starts at that resolution, which is quite nice, and that's the model we have. This is available with touch or non-touch for the 1080p display. There's also a QHD resolution, 2560 by 1440 resolution. That one is non-touch. They are all matte. This is not one of those permanent anti-glare screen protectors on here. This is actually in-cell touch technology, which means they don't need the glossy layer over the touch digitizer anymore. So no grain, no ickiness. That's good stuff. Colors on this one, well, it looks not bad, right? You've seen us use this desktop many times. Brightness, not so great. Lenovo claims 250 nits for the 1080p panel we have. We measured it at 237. That's not very high, folks. It's fine in a softly lit office. In a brightly lit studio like this, it is getting hard to see. Now, if you get the QHD model, you get a higher color gamut display, and you also get what Lenovo claims is a 300 nit brightness display. It might fall a little bit below that, but it'll still be around 50 nits brighter. Color gamut on this display, despite the fact that it looks pretty nice. If you're just a regular content consumer and wants to look at something decent, this is not bad looking, actually. Color gamut, there it is. Not the most exciting thing you've seen there. 69% of sRGB. A paltry 51% of Adobe RGB as measured by our Spider Pro colorimeter. Now, in this price category, around the $1,000, we expect to see full sRGB coverage, 99% or so, and about 75% of Adobe RGB. So that kind of hurts. You know, it's not so unusual for Lenovo business laptops, but it falls below the ThinkPad X1 Yoga. For those of you who are trying to decide between these two 14-inch animals, well, you will get a better display even if you get the 1080p display on the X1 Yoga. That one has higher color gamut, brighter too. Now, if you go for the QHD model on this, then you're going to get a more reasonable color gamut. You're going to get around 99% of sRGB and 75% of Adobe RGB. So that's also an option, as long as you can live without touch, because that one is non-touch. Now, since these are IPS displays, viewing angles are going to be good on these, and there's just a little bit of glare. Hardly any, though. It's a pretty matte panel. Black levels are 0.34, which is good, actually, at max brightness levels. And that makes for a max contrast of 680 to 1 on our 1920 by 1080p touch panel, because the brightness is not that high, despite the pretty good black levels. That's as good as you get for contrast. And that's perfectly acceptable, and that's actually in the range of competitive with other products in this price range. So even if the display doesn't wow us with color gamut, it's pretty pleasant to look at when you're watching video. It's fine. And the speakers here with Dolby Audio, they're down-firing stereo speakers on the bottom side. Is really loud. We have the volume set to 60% right now. Let's take a listen. This is Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, and excitement. Hot off the presses at CES 2016, we have the Lenovo ThinkPad X1 Yoga. Got that? Now, it's not just that it's loud. It sounds pretty full. It sounds pretty natural. It sounds like me. It's not harsh. It's not tinny. So really, for a business laptop, surprisingly good audio. The webcam up top is dual microphone, and the audio pickup on that is quite good. It's still a 720p webcam. And Lenovo claims it's good at low light, but it looks like your average, business webcam. Not super duper fantastic. This is an Intel dual-core ULV 15-watt CPU, so typical Ultrabook CPUs here. And Lenovo gets very good benchmark numbers out of the machine. I have to say, Intel Skylake 6th generation, of course, we have the 2.4 gigahertz Intel Core i5-6300U CPU, and you can see what it scored there. 3264 for the single core, 6787 for the multi-core in Geekbench 3. That's a very respectable score. We have 8 gigs of RAM in ours. It's interesting architecture. There's 4 gigs of RAM soldered on board and 1 RAM slot with DDR4 RAM installed. So you can go up to a maximum of 20 gigs of RAM if you want to. We have the standard SATA SSD interface here. We don't have that fancy NVMe SSD. So those speeds are okay, but nothing to write home about. But experientially, it feels very fast. PC Mark 8, again, a very healthy score for the home accelerated, 3167. Good stuff there. And lastly, there's the Crystal Disk Mark score that measures SSD speed. Again, this is the SATA interface M2 SSD we have in here. It's made by Samsung. Probably the slot would actually work with PCIe NVMe SSDs if you want to upgrade after the fact, since Lenovo does charge a lot and the shipping times are longer for the NVMe SSDs. You can stick a 2-leg or a 3-leg M2 SSD in there, so it's a question about whether the NVMe speeds are actually enabled on the motherboard. My suspicion is that they're only going to make one motherboard on this, so probably yes, but I can't promise you. Intel 8260 Wi-Fi AC is standard. That's dual band, Bluetooth 4.1 also. Good Wi-Fi performance there. That's the latest Wi-Fi chipset, so good times there. So let's talk a little bit about some configurations and pricing. It starts at about $980. It gets you a Core i5, the non-touch 1080p display, 4 gigs of RAM, and 128 gig SATA SSD. Ours sells for around $1,300. That's still the same Core i5, but we have a 8 gigs of RAM and a 256 gig SATA SSD and a touch screen. Touchscreen option adds around $70. If you want to go up to QHD, that's about $90 or so if you want to increase your resolution. Now, Lenovo talks about an option that we haven't actually seen yet in the United States. I believe some countries do have this, and this is for low-end NVIDIA 930M graphics with 2 gigs of DDR3 VRAM. That's pretty low-end. You know, the 940M is available in the ThinkPad Yoga 460, otherwise known as the ThinkPad Yoga 14 here in the United States, and that gives a little bit of extra oomph, enough to make a game slightly more fun, like BioShock Infinite on low settings, and that's about as much as you want to do with that. 930 is even lower, so I'm not even sure I would jump at that if it was available. So you just have Intel HD 520 graphics here until Lenovo decides to offer that option. So how about battery life? Well, there is no bridge battery systems, so there goes that. No super duper, crazy 15-hour runtimes. Lenovo claims up to 10 hours. Very likely that would be with the 1080p display, which is what we have. Now, we get more like 7.5 hours of battery life, and that's been pretty consistent. And that's doing, light productivity work, Word, Excel, email, some web browsing, streaming some Netflix video, 1080p video in that mix. If you're doing something even heftier, and this has pretty decent performance, so you might want to use it for something like compiling code. I wouldn't want to compile 500,000 line program, but for smaller programs, it certainly has all the power you need. It can do some 1080p video editing, all that sort of thing. If you do those things, you're going to get shorter battery life, but so far for us, it's actually been running quite well. I know some of you are trying to decide between the Lenovo ThinkPad T460s, which is now on the right over here, and the ThinkPad X1 Yoga on the left, and you can see the difference in the displays there in terms of brightness and in terms of color, and that is the QHD display on the left for the Yoga, but they're both pretty good looking, 1080p or QHD, and they both have the same higher color gamut than the T460s 1080p model. Again, if you get the QHD, they'll be about the same. They look almost identical, don't they? They're both very light. The T460s is a bit heavier. It's 3 pounds versus around 2.8 pounds, so it's not super duper different. Really, the difference is going to be with your Yoga, besides, generally speaking, a better quality starting level display for the 1080p display, is that active digitizer, the pen. The T does not support the Wacom AES pen. Also, for those of you who want to use it as a convertible, the Yoga yogas into a variety of positions, whereas the T only goes laying flat. That's as versatile as you get with it. One thing I actually do like better about the T460s, though, is, again, that in-cell naturally matte display, because there's no glossy layer on it. With our Yoga there, we still have a anti-glare film that's laid over the digitizer, and it's still more shiny, honestly, a bit more reflective, and it looks like there's a distance from the top of the glass to the actual picture being displayed when you look at it closely. So there you have it. It's almost a ThinkPad X1 Carbon, isn't it? It's gotten so thin and light, which is a nice thing because you still have a very ample selection of ports, especially for a very small Ultrabook like this. 14-inch display, now with higher resolution options compared to the last generation. That's a good thing. The bad news is no more bridge battery system for this particular model. It's not gone away completely from Lenovo products, but not here. In the interest in making it thinner and lighter, the T460s loses that option. For those of you who want to clip on that extra battery, that means for super duper runtimes, not going to be an option here. Otherwise, a very solid machine, a decent display, not something you'd want to use if you're a graphics art professional, unless you go with that QHD option instead of the higher resolution display with wider color gamut. But all in all, a solid machine, and starting at around $1,000, less if you get a very basic model. I'm Lisa from Mobile Tech Review. Be sure to visit our website for the full written review and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more cool tech videos.